Well, I am Muhammad. I'm at Google I/O with my good friend Sam. Okay, so both of us are here at I/O. Thanks to Google for inviting us, and we want to talk about what is released today and general trends in the industry. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Another week, another Google conference. It seems
Yes.
lately. I am, but this is the big one. This is
Yeah, this is the
I/O,
big one,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about so far that we have seen?
Okay, so when we're recording this, we should point out that we've seen the keynote this morning. We haven't seen the developer keynote. We kind of know some of the things that are coming in the developer keynote, so I guess we can talk about those things. But I think we're seeing a trend, right? So I'm gonna plant a flag that we're starting to see the trend of the products becoming more important than the models.
Uh-huh.
So we've seen Google introduce some models today with the Gemini 3.5 Flash, Omni model, but really we've also seen this sort of proliferation of products, and we've just come back from talking to the Flow people
yeah.
and talking to some of the other things and stuff as well. And I kind of feel now we're getting into this era where, yes, of course the models are important, but it's really becoming what people are doing with the models. We're seeing this with, we've got, and I'm wearing the Antigravity t-shirt here. Antigravity 2.0 rolled out, right?
Yeah.
And yes, that was anchored around the new Flash model, but it is clear that there's lots of things with it. They're even talking now about having sort of anti-gravity in search, which is kind of amazing to sort of think about. And I think we're seeing this new era of where new products are becoming possible because of all the sort of work that's gone before that has led up to this.
Okay, so you talked about anti-gravity in search, right? Like I personally feel like we are now going to see these personal agents like OpenClaw, Hermes, but which are a lot more useful,
Lockdown
easier.
and,
Lockdown as well, right? But a lot more easier to use for general population, right? So I think we're seeing Gemini Spark is going to be released, right? Do you see we're going to see similar products from other companies, or Google has kind of a moat because of their existing infrastructure, user base?
I think look, OpenClaw was such a hit. Everyone's been trying to work out how do they do an enterprise version of that, a mass consumer version of it. Google's obviously got the Gemini app. They've had that for a while. They've even had the idea of agents in Gemini for a while. We've been testing that before OpenClaw was around and stuff like that. And back then, I guess you would think of them more as tasks rather than sort of full-on, just agentic sort of long-running things. Look, Google's got your context. They've got your email. They've got your calendar. They've got everything you watched on the internet kind of thing. On YouTube, right? We saw Ask YouTube, which you and I didn't know about.
You don't have to watch the whole video anymore.
Was one of the few things that we didn't know was coming. And so I think they've got your context. It makes sense for them to try and use that to make some kind of personal agent. So we've got Gemini Spark. It's a long-running agent. It sort of probably has the equivalent of sort of cron jobs that get kicked off each day, so it can check for things for you on the web. It can find info and stuff like that. It will be really interesting, for example, though, how for me, I'm constantly monitoring Twitter or X now for things. Now, I don't think they can access that, right? That's not in search, right?
Yeah, but they have like the MCPs, right? So they will be able to bring third party. Like initially when I saw it, I was like, okay, OpenClaw, this is Google versions of OpenClaw, right? But OpenClaw has a lot more integrations. But then they talked about MCPs, right? So if you connect that, I think you can expand it to the whole ecosystem, not just like Google ecosystem, right?
True. And my guess is that they will pick certain third parties to really integrate very deeply with, and then the others, yes, they will make MCPs available, and they'll probably use that to determine what do people actually want, what MCPs are people installing.
Yeah.
If they all see like everyone's installing Notion or something, then I do think going forward, by the way, that some of these signals are going to become the signals that tell the hyperscalers what startups to buy.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Like they're going to look and see like, hey, all these people are installing this MCP for this particular app. Maybe we should just buy that, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the trend that we are seeing, right? Like OpenAI has acquired quite a few startups, relatively smaller ones. Anthropic, I think, did the same thing.
I think so far that people have been acquiring startups that really are about functionality, right? That startup has worked out how to manipulate the context window for a specific task, whether that's health, whether that's computer use, browser use, those kinds of things. We've seen a number of companies be bought in those sort of fields. I think going forward, though, the signals are going to become a lot more, what is the consumer actually using? And then like, oh, okay, maybe we should look at, either cloning that or looking at how we can partner with them better or buy them or do those kinds of things.
Okay, I want to talk about the second biggest release of the day, right? So,
which was
Flash 3.5, right?
Oh, okay,
3.5 Flash, right? So we both had early access. I put out a video on it, right? What are your vibes on the model itself?
It's definitely a nice model. It's a good model. I haven't had huge amounts of usage with it, so I want to be careful a little bit of what I say. It's a good model. It does seem to be very verbose in that it produces lots of tokens. Now, that could change over time, right? We've seen these things, these models aren't always sort of fixed in stone. They get updated and stuff like that. I'm not sure whether the version that we've been trying is actually the GA version or, we don't know. We don't always know exactly what we're trying compared to exactly what gets released and stuff like that. Because we give feedback on these things, and so like that's interesting. Still very early days, I would say. It is interesting that it's definitely more expensive. And I kind of feel that you've got to think about this maybe as being like pro light, that in some ways the Flash light has kind of moved into some of the territory that Flash used to occupy of being a very fast model. Actually, I got to give everyone a really interesting tidbit here.
Okay.
So one of the things that most people don't know is originally Flash was called Spark, right?
Oh.
And the name only changed at the last moment. So I remember we're getting ready to make content about this Flash Spark model, and it changed to Gemini Spark model, and it changed, and now we've got Gemini Spark being the actual agent, kind of thing, and that. So it's good to see the Google's reusing names.
Well, it seems like the whole industry likes Spark, right? We have Meta Spark.
DGX Spark. It is a bit weird how they all sort of do these things. I think it's early days on the Flash model. Definitely a good model. It does seem, from what we've heard at the keynote, that Google's really doubling down on making this model be the general model for everything. So this is the model that's going into search. This is the basic model in the Gemini app. This is the all these sort of things before, where we saw them sort of pushing pro. This is what makes me sort of also call this a little bit perhaps like pro light.
Pro light, okay.
Right.
Now you touched upon pricing, right?
Okay.
So the narrative that we have been hearing so far, intelligence is going to be too cheap to meter, right? Token cost is going to go to zero. But I feel like we're seeing the reverse, right? So Flash models or models in general have been getting more and more expensive. I think like the reality of compute scarcity is finally catching up, right? What do you think? We're going to see this trend, models getting more expensive?
It definitely seems that way, right? Like, I guess the thing is, are we talking about the cost of tokens or the cost of intelligence, right? The cost of intelligence is a very vague thing to, and that sounds like a marketing term to me, right? The actual cost of tokens is something that we can measure. And we've seen a few things happen going back to even GPT-5, 5.0, when it first came out, or just 5, was that, they made a big deal about, it's cheaper or whatever, but it used 3 times the number of tokens, right? So when you factored it in like that, it wasn't cheaper. And I know that from the OpenAI team that they've been working a lot on, as we've gone 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, right up to 5.5, of trying to get those long chain of thoughts to be not quite so long,
Interesting.
but still get you to the right answer. And I think like that's something that we're probably, Google's also doing the same kind of thing. They're working on it. Maybe this is why we haven't seen Pro today. Is that something still that's going on? I do think we've seen a lot of interesting things with pricing from Anthropic.
I would say like in the hindsight, Anthropic strategy was probably the correct one, right? They kept pricing high from the beginning, and they haven't changed it with every new model release.
They made some of them got more expensive.
No.
Yeah, like Haiku got cheap and then it got more expensive.
Oh yeah, okay,
right?
maybe, right? But like the Sonnet and Opus probably has remained the same.
I'm not sure totally, but yeah, okay, they're but again, they're getting more verbose, so they need more tokens, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things. If the only way to make a model more intelligent is doing longer and longer chain of thought, then that's not good, right? So everyone's trying to do that. Everyone's pulling back from that. Obviously, the big thing that's working for all the labs at the moment, the huge secret in the room, is that like the RL environments, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is not only training on RL environments. There are deals going on behind the scenes that of negotiating different RL environments, and there are startups now that all they do is sell RL environments.
Okay, a quick interruption from our sponsor today because somebody has to pay the bill. Claude is arguably the best coding agent out there. Outskill is doing a 2-day Claudathon this weekend from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, where you're going to learn from industry experts from companies like Microsoft, NVIDIA, on how to effectively use it in your own workflows and how to use the new features like skills, plugins, hooks, and more. For a limited time, the first 1,000 participants are going to get free access to the course. Link is in the video description. Now back to the video.
Do you want to talk about that a bit more? Because I think that's a very interesting topic, right? Especially like when it comes to these new capabilities. Like a lot of people don't realize that when, let's say, if you have skills, you need to actually do RL for the model to be good at this, right? You can't just take a previous generation of model, plug it in skills, and expect it to be good.
Yeah, you've got to work out some way of doing some form of post-training after you've done your pre-training to get the best results out of these systems, and the RL environments seem to be one of the things that's working really well. Supervised fine-tuning still working really well. RLHF.
I guess that's gone, right?
No, it's still there. Like if we forget calling it RHL, let's just say alignment training.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Alignment training is still there. Those things still exist, but definitely if you can build an RL environment that is like the perfect Excel or Google spreadsheets kind of environment, that you can basically just generate 10,000 Excel files that are perfectly done, or you can buy those, right?
Yeah.
And then you can generate out all the steps that get to those. That's awesome info that you can train on, right? And if you can then put that in some kind of continually improving loop, even better. Right?
Okay, so a related thing to that, sandboxes, right?
Yes.
I think like my general view is we're going to see a lot of focus on sandboxes in 2026, and I think we have already started seeing, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that, and especially with managed agents that companies are releasing, right? Anthropic, I think, already have a pretty good managed agent system.
Yeah, and Google's releasing theirs as we talk.
Yeah.
At the developer keynote. I think they're a thing, yes. There are going to be certain people that are quite happy to just write some kind of agent, upload it almost like a Google Cloud function, where it's then got a sandbox, it's then got observability attached to it, it's then got a harness attached to it, it's then got the model attached to it, right? It's got all the 4 key components there. There are going to be other companies, though, that like, hang on, we don't want you having our observability, we don't want you, having our sandbox, we want to keep that sort of private. So we're seeing these things split out as into like a managed agents and then like an agents SDK kind of thing. I guess we should touch on a little bit, maybe a little bit controversial, that ADK was a Google Cloud project, right? That wasn't a DeepMind project. what we're seeing coming out now is much more sort of influenced by DeepMind, with the new agent stuff than perhaps ADK originally was. Maybe ADK has changed a bit now, but it's interesting to sort of see. I think it affects the framework companies a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Recently on VentureBeat, we interviewed Jerry Liu from Llama Index. He kind of called that, like, in some ways, the agent frameworks are over. That nowadays you can get pretty much any coding agent to write a nice harness or write some kind of, code that you want for your particular agent. And then really it's more now about, like, how do you host that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you hook that up to some kind of harness? How do you have a sandbox, as you said, have some observability logging? In many of the cases, if it crashes, how does it automatically restart? Things like that.
Okay, so you touched upon frameworks. I would agree with you that probably you don't need frameworks anymore, right? But we are now going into this era of harness engineering. Do you think a year from now, when we are at I/O again, we're going to see that the harness companies or like these third-party harnesses are also not something viable?
So this is a really good question. So at Cloud Next, you and I walked around and talked to some of these companies, and you were a bit more aggressive than I was, I will say, in challenging them, saying, you guys are in trouble because, I won't say the swear word, but you guys are in trouble because, you guys don't control the model. And I think at the time, it made a lot of sense. Since then, I've spent some time talking to people at Anthropic and realizing, when you talk to the people at Anthropic and say, hey, so how do you guys use the cheaper models like Haiku and stuff like that in your everyday? And it's very quickly, it's like, we just use Opus 4.7 on X High, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize, okay, these big companies can't afford that, right? They just don't have, we're really now at the point where people are going to have to become much more, and they talked about, Sundar even talked about this today in the keynote, that they were saying, I think a lot of their enterprise customers are doing 1 trillion tokens
Per day.
Right? That's insane, right?
GCP,
If you think about that. So if they've got things like that, and that kind of explains where all the GPUs have gone, by the way. If you've been trying to use Antigravity or anything and you couldn't get quota, now you know where it's gone.
Exactly.
Right? Anyway, I think maybe some of those companies like Factory AI and stuff like that we spoke to, who actually did have interesting arguments, right? Could actually turn out to be true. That if you want to use Opus 4.7 for a lot of things, and then you want to use 3.5 Flash for some things, and then Flash Lite for a large bulk of it, you're probably not going to be able to do that with the managed agents from the individual providers. So we will see. Actually, you possibly will be able to do it with Google, because Google's got access to all the Anthropic models. They sell them. But they won't be able to do it with like the OpenAI models, perhaps, at the moment.
But do you think like there are going to be application-specific custom harnesses?
For sure,
Right.
for sure.
So I feel like that probably is a trend that we're going to see.
And we've
right?
talked about, you also agree with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, now let's talk about the models themselves, right? I think we are seeing more and more capable models. Where do you see the scope for open source models? I kind of have a controversial opinion on that. I want to hear yours first.
Okay, so I've been getting back into local AI a lot more since Gemma 4 came out, and the latest sort of Quen models, the latest Gemma 4 models and stuff like that. I do think it is amazing how good these local models are getting. And if you project out 6 months from now, a year from now, you've got to think that we have open models that are just as good as the models that we're currently using that are proprietary models, probably even better. And at some point, it's like, how much intelligence do you need, right? If you're hiring for a customer service, person, you don't need the person with 200 IQ, right? You can, hey, 120 IQ is great, right? Or whatever. And I think like that's going to be, I think that's where things are going. And so as we get things where these models, as the models get better on one thing, also we're starting to see new kinds of memory come onto the market. I think this is an area that I can't talk about too much, but we're going to see a lot of things come onto the market that actually make it so that your phone can run a 30, 40, 50 billion parameter model, maybe as a MOE with only 3, 4 billion active, but that will certainly become something that radically changes things, right? If you've got a model that good, to do that can do customer service in a heartbeat, right? Especially if it's post-trained to do function calling, skill use, sandbox use, these sorts of things, it's going to be on par with what are some of the proprietary models today. So I think that,
Interesting. Okay. So like I personally
what's your take?
All right. I would personally divide them into 3 different tiers, right? So smaller models, yes, those are probably user focused. You could run them. Then mid-sized models like 32B and things like that, right? Those are probably more for small business applications, more specialized workflows, right? And then you have the third, like the bigger 1 trillion parameter models, right? Those are probably not like, even though if you call them open weight, right? Those are not for people like
They're
us,
not
right?
local.
Yeah, right. So you need to have like enterprise grade hardware to actually even run those, right? And now there are like third-party services which host these models, right? So if you're hitting an API endpoint, I would rather hit a Google API endpoint or OpenAI API endpoint, right? Rather than like a Kimi or a DeepSeek.
Okay, I totally get the argument for not wanting to hit a Chinese or endpoint in a certain country and stuff like that. We've even seen that, maybe not with Kimi, I think are really cool. DeepSeek I think is really cool, but there's some of the other ones, I won't name names, that supposedly are just collecting up all this data to train on, right? And actually maybe you're even being quite honest about it more so than other companies. So yeah, I think like things like that. But the cool thing is like, while for most people, okay, anyone sitting in their bedroom is not going to run an 8-node, 8 H200s or something like that, right? That's beyond most people. But that's not beyond people running on-prem in their company, right? Where they've got basically, if you've got a bank or some rather large sort of organization, it's not a big deal for you to spend that money to have that kind of node to be able to concurrently support 30, 40, 50, 100 users at the same time. So that probably means you can support out to like at least 1,000 people.
Okay, so in that case, right, what is the incentive for the model creators? Like how does the open source economy work?
So look, I think at some point we've already seen it with Quen that they pulled back.
Yeah.
And then they were kind of forced to release, right? That they kind of were saying, that they didn't want to make, the open models as much. And then, perhaps some people like myself said, well, I'm not going to make a video. And then they were like, oh, well, turned out maybe not because of me, I'm certainly not saying that, but because there was pushback from a lot of people, they decided to make some of these models open. Look, I think at the end of the day, there will always be a lot of users that want to know, hey, I can fine tune this version of this model and I can stick it in the cloud, and then we can, we want to be hands off. We don't want to have something like that. But for like a bank, for a hospital where they want a model on-prem or somewhere that they can control every single thing about it for privacy reasons, those kind of things, they will happily go down that direction.
But kind of exploring that topic more, do you think these companies who are releasing open weight models, they're going to have more strict licenses?
It could be, yes. That could be the case, right? We could see. So remember, there was a big uproar around the Cursor 2 model, which turned out actually was kind of a bit dumb, right? Because actually they had licensed it. They licensed the right from Kimi to be able to fine tune it. Actually, everything had been done, except they just didn't tell people that in their blog posts because they wanted to sound like they made it the whole thing themselves. And so like that one I thought was very funny because you had people, on the Kimi side or the Kimi team or whatever, quite pissed off about this. And I sort of felt rightly so, tweeting out about it. And then all of a sudden, all their tweets got boom, right? And clearly someone at Kimi had said, no, they actually negotiated a license with us. We're making some money. This is the partner, this is how it's all going down. And then Cursor was forced to come out and say, well, actually, yeah, it is a fine tune or something.
Okay, that's an interesting point. And I think like one thing which I wanted to highlight was that Kimi K2 fine tuning and RL shows that I think there is a lot more we can extract from RL environment and good data with compute, right? So maybe like we don't need that many, well, we definitely need like architectural innovations, right? But still seems like there is a lot more we can extract from the existing architectures.
Yeah, you gotta be careful what we say. All right, yeah, look, I agree totally. Yes, I think that it is amazing. So, it is amazing that the sort of bigger, the 2B Gemma 4 is beating the 27B from the generation before, right?
Yeah.
And then the bigger Gemma 4 models are beating the previous generations of Gemini Flashlight and Gemini, and some of the other models from before and stuff like that, right? So, yes, we can definitely people are able to work out how to take a lot of that intelligence and put it into a smaller form factor, right? That's been lots of different tricks. Obviously, the RL environments is one of them. Just the way that those new small Gemma 4 models have got per layer embeddings, which is a really cool trick that works for small models, doesn't work, that you don't need it for bigger models. Once you get beyond a certain size, it doesn't really help you at all. But for small models, awesome, right? And it means that they can just, you can run them on an Android phone. They can sort of put the different embeddings around in different parts of RAM and stuff like that, and it just all works really nicely. And I think like those are the kind of tricks that, yes, we're seeing, these models get better and better and better. I kind of feel like we have to get to some point where you're just like, hey, I don't really know the difference between this model and this model anymore. In fact, I think we're already at that with, some proprietary models. The frontier labs, right? Yeah. You asked me about Gemini 3.5 Flash. It's a nice model. Yes, very nice model. I tried it out with different things. It worked out. I didn't make a video about it because it's like, okay, what am I going to show that this is hugely better than the one before? Yeah, okay, it's very much vibes at the moment, right?
Yeah.
I still haven't seen all the benchmarks for it. The artificial analysis will be really interesting to see. I think you were saying that they're saying it uses 5x more tokens.
Yeah, so I think it uses 5x more token to. I need to be careful here because I don't exactly remember. Okay. But I think for the same benchmark, it uses 5x more tokens, right? For pricing wise, it's 3x more expensive both for input and for output.
Okay, I haven't looked at the pricing yet.
Yeah.
So, okay. I guess we should preface this of we're literally recording this just after this has been announced. So we may have gotten some of the facts wrong. But definitely, yes, my vibe is that, it's using more tokens, and then you got to factor in, well, okay, if it's faster, but hey, if it's using more tokens, then is it really faster to get to the answer? What is it that I care about? Do I care about the speed of tokens per second? Do I care about time to first token? Do I care about time to full answer?
Yeah.
Right? If it's time to full answer, then maybe it's actually, for certain things, it's not going to be a win. But for a lot of things, it will be. It does seem like for Antigravity and stuff like that, they talked about that they made a whole OS with this for 2.6 trillion? Billion tokens. Yes, 2.6 billion tokens.
At $1,000.
And about $1,000 for making the OS. I don't really know what the OS can do that's any better than Linux or something. That's more what I was kind of interested. Like if you showed me, hey, we made this OS that's just for genetic data, and I think we will see things like that, right? I think we saw, Demis talking about, isomorphic and what's going on there. And I think that's where you will see some of the real interesting things with these things, where they do actually make things that really couldn't exist before or would have been just too cost prohibitive to do that kind of thing before.
Okay, so do you think, in your opinion, these frontier labs are now trying to focus more on the inference and trying to reduce the cost rather than like the making bigger models? Like if we see a trend that, okay, we are seeing consolidation in capabilities, and I think it's more about applications now, right?
I think, okay, a few things there. I think definitely the days of just make the model bigger are over, right? The days of just train on more tokens is still going on.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And now the tokens that were the amount of tokens for pre-training versus the tokens, it used to be like pre-training was this, and then post-training was like this tiny little bit over here. That's changed, right? So yes, overall a lot more tokens, but also the splits of how that is going on has clearly changed. So I think that's one thing. I think all the labs want more intelligent models, right? I think just the drive of Demis, of Dario, of the people at OpenAI, is that they want to reach AGI, and they all believe that this AGI thing, which no one, we shouldn't even get into that, right? They all believe this AGI thing is going to come with a smarter model, and that's going to happen. At the same time, they're all getting, they're all realizing, hey, we can make money out of this stuff now, and that lots of people want to buy tokens. So how do we make it more efficient to create those tokens, serve those tokens, collect money for those tokens? And I think so. You've got this playing off. Google's a big enough lab that they've always got people working on many sides of it. They've got the Pareto frontier going that they're constantly trying to push. I think Anthropic, kind of similar, perhaps a little bit more weighted to the top end intelligence in what they're focused on. OpenAI, I don't know, right? Like, they seem to go back and forth. Like the current 5.5 seems definitely a step forward in the intelligence sort of way. Will we see smaller models? You told me a really interesting stat before about Arc AGI. Do you want to tell people that about like the X high versus not X high for 3.5? That was kind of interesting.
This was really interesting. I might get the numbers wrong, but in the morning when I saw on Arc AGI 2, Flash 3.5 scores, I think 8% with minimal thinking.
With minimal thinking.
Right? And then it goes to, I think, 90% with high, which is kind of incredible, right? And I think for ArcAGI 2, it's ArcAGI 3, it's very similar, right? So it seems like within the same model, just by changing the the reasoning token budget, you can extract a lot more performance, which is kind of incredible.
In some ways, it's not surprising, right? If you basically allow the model to generate more tokens, to go down different paths, to pull them back, it's going to do better. We know, for example, that DeepThink and stuff like that will do that in parallel and can be extremely slow to do it, but can actually find a lot of interesting paths that perhaps certainly the sort of no thinking ones will find.
But like earlier, I remember there were a few studies in which, especially with the earlier reasoning models, they showed that if the model stops reasoning early, they tend to generate correct responses. If it thinks for longer, after a certain point, like it usually tends to generate wrong answers, right?
I think a lot of that research, though, is very hard to judge because people are constantly trying to improve how the chain of thought works. So if you've got like these step-by-step chain of thought, we're seeing with GPT 5.5, they're trying to scale it back. So instead of n number of steps, it's now n minus 5, number of steps.
Interesting.
And the challenge is that those papers that test those things test one version of this, and they don't necessarily see all the improvements over time or something like that. So it's not that the paper's wrong. It's just that the paper is like a snapshot of one particular way of rolling out these long chain of thoughts.
Okay, I think we are coming up on time. Let's say, if I were to ask you today, who do you think is winning the LLM AI
You can't
race.
ask me that. You can't ask me that. Okay. Who's winning the AI race? Okay, I think in general humans are, right? Okay, I will take the cop-out answer. I think like I find this kind of insane because I started working with LLMs in 2018, maybe even 2017, something like that, playing around with them. And even back then, the ideas were kind of cool and stuff like that. Like, okay, going back to LSTMs, I remember like with LSTMs, right? We had, we had
days, right?
we would make an LLM, a language model with LSTMs, and it could go out maybe sort of 50 steps, right? With the whole sort of char RNN sort of days and stuff like that. And back then we were just like, oh, if we could just get 10x this, right?
Yeah.
And then we got sort of like basic attention, and we could go out 150 steps, something. Then finally the transformer came along, BERT came along, you could go to 500 steps. And that was like, my God, mind blowing, this thing can suddenly do stuff. Okay, now forget the size of the context window. It can just do stuff, so much better. So, I think ideas that just that were not only just impossible, but even sort of impossible to think about back then, suddenly now are just like, oh yeah, that could work, right? Or that's an interesting idea. These things could work. And so I think like, who's winning? I think we are, right?
Yeah.
I'll say that, right? That like, anyone who's using the models, and especially if you played with, some of the early models, even people who played with GPT-3, are kind of blown away by the change.
Like as a practitioner, yes. Like even if 5 years ago you would have asked me whether these things would be possible, I would say like no.
Yeah,
no
no,
way.
exactly.
It's kind of crazy. All right, we are almost on time. Any parting thoughts?
Not really. I guess, look, we haven't touched on the managed agent stuff. There's some really interesting stuff coming there. Maybe at some point we do a follow-up or something.
Yeah, we should do this more often.
We will definitely make videos about some of this stuff. You want to stay on top of it. I kind of feel like you definitely want to be able to check out the thing. And I think you've got to also move to the sort of point where you start saying, okay, I don't care what Sam the YouTuber says about this model. I'm going to test it on my evals, right? I'm going to test it on my use case. Because maybe for me it's really awesome, but for this person it's not. Like, those sorts of things, I think you need to really focus on that nowadays much more than like just, the model's this much better or 10% better or something like that. It's not about those things. It's we're dealing with such jagged intelligence now that the model can be, a genius many times over in one area and like dumber than a 5-year-old kid in other areas.
That's perfectly put. We're gonna stop on that. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you.
And Sam signing out. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.